The Rebbe began to Farbrengen this afternoon that Bechlal, by Torah, we find the concept that Bechol Yoim Yiu Beinecha Kichadoshim. Mara tells us that we have to look at Torah every day with such an inspiration as if we had received it on this day. Usually the nature of a person is that something which is new, he expresses much more enthusiasm towards this. So the same, we have to look at Torah. Not that it is, as the expression in Chazal is, idyutke me yeshena, an old document, an old proclamation. It is not so. Everything in Torah we have to view just as if we have gotten it today. Another place in the Gemara and Chazal we find the expression, not only as if we have gotten it today, in other words, Kichadoshim, like it is something new. No, bechol yoim yiu beinecha chadoshim. Look at it every day as it is mamish new. Not as is, but look at it that it is something new. With such inspiration, this is how we have to greet Torah and express such type of feelings towards Torah. Memela, the Rebbe says, this applies to every Shabbos, and to every Shabbos Mavachim as well. So, though, he mentioned, he raised the question, though we find a completely different area, it is expressed in Chassidus, Tainuk Tmidi Einoi Tainuk. A constant pleasure is not considered a pleasure. In other words, if a person has to adjust himself to a mood of pleasure, to a mood of Eineg, he cannot always be in that mood. There are certain different moods, and then he comes into a pleasurable mood, so he appreciates the einig, he appreciates the pleasure. Or the Rebbe brought an example from Halacha. In Halacha we find that when Benegeya Chassan V'Kala, it is so in Halacha that every day of the Sheva Brachas, except Shabbos, we have to have a Panim Chadashas, a new face, a newcomer, somebody who hasn't participated in the previous Sheva Brachas or in the wedding. Why? Because the newcomer adds Simcha. So we see that a new person adds simcha. Something, an ongoing situation, is not a situation of simcha. Here we say by Torah, we have to view it every day that it is new as if we have just received it. It's obviously a contradiction. We cannot adjust ourselves to look at something which is constant with the same enthusiasm as something which comes from time to time, as something which is new. The Rebbe raised this question, and he answered, Ein kan mekoymai, here is not the place to get involved in explaining these differences. But nonetheless, we know that every inyan in Kedusha, being that it is so in Torah, it is the same by every inyan in Kedusha, that this concept applies, how we have to view it, that with the same enthusiasm as if we have just gotten it. Then we know that there's an inyan of kol yoima v'yoima avid avidate. Every day has its inyan. So we have the kol yoima v'yoima avid avidate, as it is arranged in the 6 or 7 days of the week. And then we have, more than that, every day and every Shabbos and every occasion which we come across has its special inyan. Today, we are benching Shabbos Mavochim Kislev. So first of all, we have to view, as I just explained, we have to look at it with the same enthusiasm as if it is something new. Like any inyan in Torah. At the same token, however, we find something special in the month of Kislev and in Shabbos Mavochim Kislev, which we do not have in any other Shabbos Mavochim, which we do not have in any other month. And that is, the Rebbe continues, the month of Kislev finishes with a Yontif. The last days of the month of Kislev is Chanukah. We do not have any other month in the Jewish calendar whose closing days of the month are a Yontif. And the Rebbe stressed, the closing is a very important thing. We know Hakil Hoylech Achar HaChitum, the Gemara tells us. Everything we view in accordance to the end. Memela, the end of the month is something very meaningful. Though he says, now we are just entering the beginning of the month, and we want to take into consideration something special which will take place at the end of the month. The Rebbe says this is very simple. And it's something which even a Pashut Shebipshutim, it's known to everyone. Everybody knows that we have Chanukah. No one has to be at a special level to know about this. And Memela, everybody has a shaykhs to this, every Yid has a shaykhs to it, and here we know that this month, which we are entering now, has something so special in it, that the closing days of the month are a yontif. Though the month of Tevis, Rabbi continues, has a better mile. Not only does it close with a yontif, it opens with a yontif. Because the first day in Tevis is also Chanukah. Chanukah extends into Tevis. The opening of Tevis is with Yom Tovim. So the Rebbe says, however, Tevis is not an exception in that. There is another month which opens with a Yontif. Tishrei has Rosh Hashanah. However, a month that the closing days of the month should be Yom Tovim, Yontif, this is only the month of Kislev. So Mamela, this is the specialty of the month which we are entering. It's a month that has such a special inyan in it that it closes with a Yontif. It also has other inyan. Yutas Kislev. Yutas Kislev is very meaningful to us. Yutas Kislev has a shaykhus to the Alter Rebbe. And especially this Shabbos, we are in the week. This is the Shabbos where this past week we had Chof Cheshvan, 20 days in the month of Cheshvan, which was the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. Here the Rebbe expressed himself that this is the Shabbos where Chof Cheshvan is elevated, because as always spoken, Shabbos elevates the entire week. So this Shabbos elevates Chof Cheshvan as well. The Rebbe Rashab expressed himself that the main stress on Hafotzas Hamayonis, spreading Chassidus, began after Peterburg. Just the expression, in other words, after the whole mindset of Yutas Kislev. If the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, that is when the spreading of Chassidus really began with a strong force. And the Mr. Rebbe continues, this has a shaykhus to the Baal Shem Tov as well, not only to the Alter Rebbe, but to the Baal Shem Tov. In other words, it has a shaykhus to all of the Rabbeim, up to the Alter Rebbe, and even further to the Baal Shem Tov. It is known as a story that when the Alter Rebbe was in prison, he was questioned. And to one of the hearings when he was questioned, he was asked if he has any shaykhus to the Baal Shem Tov. Is his movement, Teiro Sachsidis, does it have a shaykhus to the Baal Shem Tov? And the Alter Rebbe definitely answered, yes it does. And the Alter Rebbe said later that had he not said that he has a shaykhus to the Baal Shem Tov, they would have released him right away from prison. So he could have made it much easier for himself. However, he did not want to be parted from the Baal Shem Tov, to be a nifchad from the Baal Shem Tov, even for 1 minute. In other words, this second, which he will take for him to respond that he has no shaykhus to the Baal Shem Tov, he didn't want that. He constantly was closely, spiritually attached to the Baal Shem Tov. So this is the Yontiv of Yutas Kislev, which we have in this month, which has a shaykhus actually to all of the Rabbeim. So it's not a very meaningful date in the month. And besides, it is also Tes Kislev, 9 days in the month of Kislev, which this is the Hilula Yortzeit. That's the day when the Mittel Rebbe passed away. The Mittel Rebbe's Yortzeit is on Tes Kislev, 9 days in the month of Kislev. And here the Rebbe quoted the famous Igeras HaKodesh, how tzaddikim, if departing from this world, still have a shaykhus to this world and try to accomplish and help and be of assistance to all of their followers in this world. Payil Yeshuais Bekerev Haaretz. And how much more is this so on the day of the Yortzeit? What is the main accomplishment? What did Hasidus introduce? We just mentioned that this is what this month stands for. The whole inyan of Yutas Kislev. Rebbe says one of the major introductions which Hasidus came and introduced is the inyan of Simcha. To serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Simcha, with joy. Though on one hand it's a pasuk, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. So why did we need Hasidus to introduce this? But at the same time, the Rebbe says, we know that there is a pirush from the Arizal on a pasuk, Tachas asher lo yavadetos Hashem Elokecha b'simcha v'tuv lavav. Pasuk says, we will be punished chas v'shalom for not serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tachas asher levadatos Hashem Elokecha b'simcha v'tuv levav. So the Pashat Taich in the pasuk is that we didn't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu while we were in a mood of simcha and we had all our needs and we weren't lacking anything and still we weren't serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Arizal introduces a new pshat in this pasuk. The Arizal introduces that the pasuk says that one is worthy chas v'shalom of an einish. Why? Tachas asher lo yavadatos Hashem Elokecha b'simcha. For not serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy. Whenever we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to serve Him with joy, b'simcha. And this pasuk, with this interpretation, is quoted by the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. Rebbe says, though it was the Arizal who introduced this pshat, this interpretation, still we find by many of the disciples of the Arizal who did not live up to this type of a serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we see that in those generations it wasn't accepted by all yet. However, came the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe stressed and put it into Tanya. And this is one of the major teachings of Chassidus, that we have to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'simcha, with joy. And here the Rebbe says, though one may think, if he sits down and makes a serious cheshbon, makes a serious calculation, and sees where he's standing, so he comes to realization, why should he be b'simcha? He's really not worthy of being b'simcha. Rebbe says, let us look at the end results. The end result is, there's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe. If one wants to know what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing, and he has no way to choose, so let him look at the end results if he does one way or he does the other way. What will be the outcome? Rebbe says, from being sad, from being marish chayra, there will not be no good outcome. However, if one is besimcha, if one is real happy and real joyous, that is when it could lead to an outcome of learning and davening and fulfilling all the mitzvahs of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Mela the Rebbe again elaborated very strongly and explained how important it is to serve the Rebbeinu with simcha. And all our deeds and everything we do has to be bound and be expressed together with a tremendous amount of joy, a tremendous amount of simcha. Then the Rebbe continued, this message has a shayches to the month of Kislev, regardless what date Rosh Chodesh comes out, what date Shabbos Mevorchim comes out. However, there's something specific this year, taking in consideration the date when Shabbos Mevorchim Kislev comes out, and that is today's date. Today's date is Chaf Hei Cheshvan, 25 days in the month of Cheshvan. What is so special about 25 days in the month of Cheshvan? The Rebbe says there's a Megillas Tainis. A Megillas Tainis is a sefer which was written in times of Gemara, and it contains many important inyanim which have taken place on various dates. The Gemara tells us, Botla Megillas Tainis, that nowadays we don't firzich, we don't act in accordance to Megillas Tainis. What does this mean? The Rebbe explains. It means that the days that Megillas Tainis says that Megillas Tainis discusses various inyanim which happened on various dates. And there are positive inyanim and negative inyanim, happy inyanim and sad inyanim. Memela, today we don't, for example, if it's a sad inyan which is discussed in Megillas Tainis, and Megillas Tainis recommends that day as a tanis, today we do not firzach in halacha in accordance to the recommendations of Megillas Tainis. Same thing in the positive way also. However, the Rebbe says, this does not take away from the fact that whatever is related in Megillas Tainis, where they tell us that certain inyanim have taken place on certain days, this is a fact. This still remains. So Memela Botla Megillas Tainis is only as far as the halacha end of it. We do not follow Megillas Tainis in the sense of halacha. However, whatever is told in Megillas Tainis and Yonim which have transpired on certain days, this definitely is of meaning to us. So Megillas Tainis tells us that on Chaf Hei Cheshvan, after the first Gullus, in other words, when Yidden began to come back to the Beis HaMikdash, after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, they were coming back to the second Beis HaMikdash, a group of Yidden wanted to settle in a certain area. And Megillas Tainis tells us that the Kusim did not let them settle there. Now the Rebbe right away says, it is not known to us exactly what is meant in Megillas Tainis by the Kusim. Now, normally in Gemara, Kusim is meant a sect of people who would worship, who pretend that they were Yidden, and later they were caught that they were worshipping Avodah Zarah. The Rebbe says, could be that because of the census, it's not spelled out clear who was really this group of, whether they were Taka de Kusim or it was another group of Goyim, that did not let the Yidden settle in a certain area where they wanted to make a settlement. So the Yidden left that area, and they went to another area. And that is where they made a Jewish settlement. And Megillas Tainis continues that they made the settlement, and they built a brick wall. They built a chayma around the settlement which they made. And it continues that people, Yidden, from neighboring areas, came out to assist them and to help them build this chayma, this wall. And the Megillas Tainis concludes that that area was called an Ir Brucha, a blessed city. That's how he continues. That's how he concludes this thing. What shaykhs does this have to us today, the Rebbe says? The Rebbe explains that the Hayrah, the lesson which we can derive from this incident which was related to us, what has transpired on this date, is extremely meaningful to us. It comes to show us that when Yidden come to an area, Yidden come to settle somewhere, immediately a wall has to be built. What is the idea of the wall? Spiritually, Ani Choyma, there's a pasuk. So the Medrash says, what do we mean in the spiritual sense of a wall? Zu Torah. Torah is a wall. What's the pshat of wall? A wall is a protector. Torah protects. Torah is the spiritual protection which Yidden have. In order for Yidden to exist as Yidden, we have to be surrounded with this spiritual wall, which is Torah, and Torah gives us the koyach so that we should be able to exist. Memela, we are told right away, when can Yidden be successful? When they come into an area, and Yidden want to settle in an area, make a Yiddish settlement there. When Yidden build a wall, what's the wall? Torah. When Yidden associate themselves with Torah, and our lives are guided by Torah. And not only, as we find in that incident, the incident right away tells us, not only did they satisfy themselves by themselves building the wall, they immediately invited and got neighboring people involved that them too should participate in building this wall. So Memele, this is the idea that they utilize their influence not only on themselves, but on their neighbors as well. So whoever lived in their surroundings, they motivated them with this idea that they have to have a spiritual wall, the chayma. What is the chayma? Torah. Around us, so that we should be able to survive as Yidden and exist as Yidden. Because this is what gives Yidden a koyach to be able to survive. Then the Rebbe continues, this is told to us what has happened after by the first Golus which Yidden were in. In other words, after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. Now we are again in Golus. And we cannot say that we are living in times of Aschalta de Gula, of the beginning of the Geula. It is not so. And here the Rebbe began talking about the situation in Eretz Yisrael today. The Rebbe says, in Eretz Yisrael there was never such a time that Yidden were looking to bring themselves close to Goyim and associate themselves with Goyishkeit, it's the expression he used, as we find today. It is unheard of. What is going on, Yidden are running after Roitzchim and the Mechablim. Mechablim are the terrorists, and are looking to find satisfaction in the eyes of these people and to give them away more and more of Eretz Yisrael. Here the Rebbe turned back to what happened at Camp David. He says it's very obvious today the results of Camp David. The Rebbe says he does not know why they named it Camp David. David has a shaykhus to David HaMelech, David Malki Mashiach. But the fact is that this is the name that this has. The results that have came out, the agreements which were made by Camp David, the Rebbe says we are still suffering from them. Yidden were driven out of parts of Eretz Yisrael. Who had to do this job? Those who are soldiers to protect Eretz Yisrael. And they are ready to sacrifice their lives, Mesiras Nefesh, to go and protect the security of Eretz Yisrael. What were these people used for? They were used to chase people out of their homes and take them out of areas, new built areas in Eretz Yisrael, Yamit and its surroundings. Then, the oil, the naft as the Rebbe calls it, which is extremely essential for Yerushalayim, for Hebron, for Tzfas, for the entire Eretz Yisrael. There's no need to explain how important, how vital and important this is for the existence of Eretz Yisrael. What was done? This was given away. To whom was all this given? To the Mitzrim. The Mitzrim, the Rebbe says, to the ones who we were, our first galus, which we suffered, was by Mitzrayim. There's an expression in Chazal, Kol HaGoliyos, all the exiles, Al Shem Mitzrayim Nikru, are referred to as Mitzrayim. So this was given back to the Mitzrim. What was the excuse? The excuse is that had otherwise, if not for this arrangement, we would need thousands upon thousands of Jewish soldiers to stand on the boundaries, on the border, on the Egyptian-Israeli border. Rabbi says he doesn't know if the soldiers were tucked there, or they are there, or they're not there, but this is not the issue. Let us look at the outcome. What are we suffering from what we've given away to Mitzrayim? And here the Rebbe mentioned that there was an investor who put in a tremendous amount of money into the resources in Sinai, and he had to be paid out because all of this was given away to Mitzrayim. The Rebbe says, which were the monies which were used to pay out this investor, or as well as Bechlal people, given funds for them to appease them to leave all of these areas in Eretz Yisrael? What monies were used for this? The Rebbe says monies which Yidden donate at appeals which are being made in shuls all over the world at Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur, during Kol Nidrei, when Yidden give tzedakah and they're under the impression that they're giving tzedakah for Eretz Yisrael, these funds are used for such type of things. And here the Rebbe again continued and spoke about it, a tremendous amount of bitterness. The Rebbe says, he himself was never in Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbe says neither was he in Washington at the time. The arrangement of Camp David was made, but he's heard and all the feedback was brought back to him what led to the entire arrangement of Camp David. And basically it was pressure. Those individuals who were involved in the Camp David arrangement claimed that they couldn't resist because they were put under pressure. So the Rebbe says, what type of an excuse is that? If one feels, when he's in a public position, and he feels that he's under pressure, as such type of pressures which he cannot resist, then he kaved v'sheiv b'mkoimcha. Go ahead and sit at home, go back home, and sit home, and resign from the position you are in, and because you don't have the strength to hold back pressures, to go ahead and put into sakana, put into danger, the betachon, the security of over 3 million Yidden, this is an unheard of thing. And here the Rebbe described an individual who was involved in the Camp David arrangement. He says initially he lived in Chutz La'aretz, and then he came to Eretz Yisrael, and even when he was in Eretz Yisrael, there were times which he had to be hiding while he was in Eretz Yisrael, until finally he came to one position to another, and he was a reputable person before, and he's a reputable person even before he became Prime Minister. And he would have been reputable had he resigned and not get involved and commit such type of a thing which we are constantly suffering from. So what he should have done is simply go ahead and resign if he felt he could not hold out against the various pressures which were put on him. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, let us go a step. Let us go a step back further. It was after the 6-Day War when Yidden succeeded in an unusual way. At that time, right after the 6-Day War, delegations from Eretz Israel came to the United States, came to Washington, to offer that they are willing to make various type of concessions and give in for this territory and give in that territory, something which the Goyim never even dreamt of. The Rebbe expressed himself, Arafat didn't think that the Yidden would be ready to give up territories. Neither did Mitzrayim, neither did Jordan, neither did Syria. And here the Yidden, looking to win satisfaction in the eyes of the Goyim, began sending messengers and delegations and messages right away to Washington that they are ready to give up all different types of territories. And now, getting back to the situation we are in now, all of this is coming as an outcome of the Camp David arrangement, and now there's talk going on about continuing again to make concessions in the territory of Yehuda v'Shomron, and other territories, and all of this is all type of autonomy arrangements which are being planned and are being discussed. And then on the other hand, the Rebbe says there are Yidden that are coming and saying that we are living now in a time of Aschalta de Gula, that we are seeing the beginning of the Gula. We are living in such a dark time, and such unwanted things are happening, where Yidden are acting this way, and here there are those that want to interpret this, that this is the beginning of the Gula. How can we make such a mistake? The Rebbe says there were times he didn't speak about all this. Initially, at the time of Camp David, he spoke about it. Then he felt, why should he stop talk about it? He sees he's not accomplishing. So he just let it go. But now that this issue is again up, and there's talk again, how Yidden are running after the Goyim and are looking constantly and trying to convince them how they are willing to give up and make all different type of arrangements on all of these territories. The Rebbe says he cannot hold himself back. He has to talk about it. And again, the Rebbe says, if we want Al Pi Torah, when a decision has to be made, such type of a decision, it is not in the hands of anybody else other than those who have the best understanding what is the best security for Yidden. And it's not politicians that could decide. It's not people in different type of offices that could make such type of a decision. This decision, just like B'negei Refuah, when there's a medical issue, Torah itself tells us, who do we rely on? We rely on doctors. Why? Because they are the ones that have the best medical understanding to make a decision, the proper decision, what should be done with the person. The same, the Rebbe says, when such type of a decision has to be made, it also has to be in the same way. Who is authorized to make such type of a decision? It is only those who have a proper understanding as far as what is the right or wrong move to take or make, which will protect best Klal Yisrael, over 3 million Yidden who are residing today in Eretz Yisrael. Here the Rebbe concluded, the Gemara tells us, that Kol mi sheyesh b'yira shemayim devarav nishmoy. Anyone who possesses Yira Shemayim, his words are listened to. Mele the Rebbe says, his words are not listened to. He doesn't know, maybe it's his fault. In other words, maybe he does not have enough Yira Shemayim, that's how the Rebbe expressed himself. And that is why his words are not having the proper influence. The Rebbe says, let's see. We just spoke about in the previous Sikha on the importance of Simcha, of serving the Rebbe with Simcha. So if the inyan which he spoke about before will have an influence on people, that's the siman that he has Yira Shemayim. Then he concludes, the Rebbe says, but the bottom line is that it doesn't matter that he should gain more Yira Shemayim and everybody should gain more Yira Shemayim, and this will definitely help to speed up the coming of Mashiach if everybody, including himself, get more Yira Shemayim and gain more Yira Shemayim. This Sikha took up quite a bit of time, but this was actually the second Sikha. By the time the Rebbe was finished with this Sikha, it was already 20 to 4. Later the Rebbe said a short Maimah, and as usual explained a Rashi in this week's Sedra, as well as an inyan which has a shaykhs to the Zoyar, and also an inyan which has a shaykhs to the Rambam. Regarding the inyan in the Zoyar which the Rebbe explained, Rabbi explained the Zohar with the commentary of his father. The Zohar discusses the expression that tshuva is done b'shaita chode, b'rige chode, u'b'yoyma chode. In other words, a person can be sinning for a long part of his life, and later, if he does tshuva is is an immediate move. It's an instant move. It's b'shaita chode in one while. Shaita rather stems from the word shah, hour. Beriga chada, it's in Aramaic, in one rega, in 1 minute. Ubiyoyma chada, in 1 day. In other words, in one move, in other words, what this thought really wants to explain is that a person in 1 day or in 1 while or in 1 hour can change his entire life. So the Rebbe raised the question, we know every expression in Torah is accurate. First comes a minute. After a minute comes an hour, after the hour comes the day. So the expression should have gone, Beriga chada, B'shaita chada, or B'yoyma chada. Or if we want to go the other way, B'yoyma chada, in 1 day, or an hour, or in a minute. So, as far as the Rebbe says, explains it, that it deals with various interpretations that have a shaykhs to Sfiras, to Kabbalah, and so forth. The Rebbe says, he would allow himself to say a pshetel. A pshetel. Pshetel means, as we will see, so a certain type of a chap. A sharp type of explanation. Rabbi says with the introduction that today, this Shabbos, is the kenes, there's a convention of shluchim this Shabbos. Shluchim from all over the country have gathered here for this weekend. So the Rebbe says he considers himself also a shliach. He says he's a shliach from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Rebbe expressed himself. And Memela, he will say an inyan that has a shaykhas to shlichas. Shliach is an abbreviation. Shliach is spelled Shin, Lamed, Yud, Ches. The Shin is Shaita Choda, 1 hour. We'll get back to the Lamed in a minute. The Yud is Yoima, a day. Choda, 1. In other words, what's the whole union of a Shliach? Whole union of a Shliach is to accomplish and to awaken Yidden to live up to this union of Tshuva. First, the Shliach has to see to it that his own standards are properly, and then also at the same time to awaken Yidden that they should live up to Shaita Choda and Riga Choda, bring them back, attach them to the Rebishter, and to Chassidus, and to Torah and Mitzvahs. What is the Lamed? This is the Shin, the Yud, and the Ches. Lamed, the Rebbe says it's very simple. The Lamed is Limud HaTorah. In other words, what do we awaken Yidden with? What do we bring Yidden close to the Rebishter with? With Torah. So this is what Shliach abbreviates. Shin, Lamed, Yud, Ches, Shaita, the Shin, Ches is Choda, 1. We actually could use the Ches twice. Shaita, Choda, Limud, learning of Torah, and the Yud, Yoyma Choda. Shaita Choda, Yoyma Choda, this expresses the entire concept of Tshuva. What a Lamed. Now this past Simchas Torah, there was a very famous Sikha from the Rebbe. Simchas Torah night before HaKafis, where the Rebbe also was talking about the greatness of a Shliach. And the Rebbe said that Shliach, add plus 10, puts together the word Mashiach. Shliach is spelled Shin Lamed Yud Ches, and Mashiach has a Mem. Mem Shin Yud Ches. Mem is with 10 more than Lamed. So as the Rebbe explained at Simchas Torah evening, that when a Shliach does his work properly, what do we mean by 10? 10 is the Eser Koiches HaNefesh. In other words, every person has 10 Koiches, and he's solely dedicated to his work. With his Eser Koiches HaNefesh that he possesses, this leads to the coming of Mashiach. So what do we see? That the word Shaliach has a shayches also to Mashiach. So the lamet has a shaykhs to the mem. In other words, the lamet is replaced with a mem. So that means that there's a shaykhs between these two letters. What is the shaykhs here between the lamet and the mem? The Rebbe continues today. There's a Gemara Masechta Shabbos where the Gemara there discusses the various aleph-based letters. There the Gemara uses the expression that mem, we have a mem psucha and a mem stuma. There's an open mem and a closed mem. This is how we have the aleph-based. There's the regular mem and there's what we would call the shlos mem. The shlos mem is a closed mem. What shaykhs does this have to our meaning? Mem. Lamet means the inyan of limud ha-Torah. Torah has two chalakim. There's the chalik, there's the open chalik of Torah, and there's the sealed chalik of Torah. There is nigla de Torah, and there is pnimius ha-Torah. What is the uftu? What is the accomplishment of a shaliach? A shaliach has to associate both of these chalakim and Torah, which this is what Chassidus Chabad is all about. This is what the Rebbe Shem Satan has stressed. There's a famous sikha from the Rebbe Rashab, how the Indian of Chassidim is to take Nigler Torah and Pnimiyus Torah and tie it together. To reveal Pnimiyus Torah to those who have no shaykhs to it as yet, and also teach them Nigler Torah. And furthermore, to prove, as the Rebbe expressed, how it is all Torah Achas L'Kolona, it is really all one Torah. And there's the Chelik HaNigla, which is tied into the Nista, and there's the Chelik of Nista, which is tied into the Nigla. So this is what Shaliach is all about. Memele, this is the abbreviation of Shaliach, and this is how it has a shaykhs to Mashiach. It's explained in the Simchas Torah the Farbrengen, as we just now related, that the Lamet and the Mem have a shaykhs, the Limud HaTorah in the Mem. Mem, which represents both Chelke HaTorah, the Chelik of Nigla Torah as well as the Chelik of Pnimis HaTorah. Now let us go to the Rashi in this week's Sedra. Actually, the Rebbe raised two questions in two different Rashis. There was one at the end of the Sedra. At the end of the Sedra, there's in Kapitel Chav Daled, Pasik Samach Vav. After Eliezer has accomplished and finished his entire mission, and has brought back Rivka with him as a wife to Yitzchak, Pasuk tells us, "Vayisaper ha'eved liYitzchak es kol hadvarim asher asa." That the slave, whom do we mean by the slave Eliezer, related to Yitzchak everything which he has done. If we look into Rashi, on Pasuk Samach Vav, "Vayisaper ha'eved," the Eved told. Rashi says, "Gilaloi," he related to Avram Avinu, "Nisim shenasu." The tremendous miracles which he had on his entire journey. Shekoftzaloi ha'aretz, that he had kfitzas haderech, the trip which should have taken much longer really went much faster. V'shenizdamnaloi Rivka b'tfilasei, and through his prayers he was successful in meeting Rivka. Rabbi says in Rashi, we know everything is extremely accurate. Not only is every word of Rashi accurate, but when Rashi quotes the pasuk, this is extremely accurate. And the Rebbe says even more accurate. Why? Even more accurate than the words in Rashi, because here we are dealing with words of Chumash, and every word in Torah Shebiksav is extremely accurate. This entire interpretation, which Rashi is saying, Rashi could have quoted the word Vayisaper, he told. He told, and Rashi tells us, what did he tell? He told the tremendous miracles. Rashi stresses not only Vayisaper, and Rashi quotes Vayisaper ha'eved, the slave told. Why is it negeya for this interpretation to also quote the word Evet? This does not add any meaning to this Pirush of Rashi. So the Rebbe learns. Definitely does. In other words, Eliezer was stressing that all of his success was not due to himself. All of his success was because he was an Eved Avram, he was a slave of Avram. Memela, now that he's an emissary of Avraham Avinu, now that he's telling of the great miracles that he had, and he was successful in finding Rivka b'tfilasei, he's not attributing all this to his own greatness. Why did all this happen? Because he's an Eved Avraham. That is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu did perform such nisim in his trip and gave him kvitas haderech, in other words, hastened his journey under unusual terms. And Shenizdamna Rivka bitfilas, and he met Rivka. Why was all this? He himself is stressing. While he's relating all this back to Avram, he's telling Avram, do you know why all this happened? In other words, Eliezer's feeling, why did all this happen? Because he is the Eved Avram. So that's why Rashi does not quote only the word Vayisaper. The word Ha'eved is also of importance here. Because why did all these things happen? Because Eliezer was an Eved Avram. Another Rashi which the Rebbe explained in today's Farbrengen was a Rashi which deals with Ma'oras HaMachpelah. If we go back to the beginning of Chayei Sarah, where Torah begins talking about the Machpelah, so Rashi in Kapitel Chav Gimel Pasuk Tes right away tells us, what does Machpelah mean? Machpelah means double. Bayis va'ali al gabav. It was a house and it had a little attic or a little floor on top. That is one pshat. Davar achar, another pshat. Shekfula bezugos. It was doubled with couples. In other words, all those who were buried there were couples. So that is why Machpelah stemming from the word kefel, double. Whoever was buried there was a couple. So Rashi has kind of right away gives us an introduction that every time we will come across the word Machpelah, this is actually what Machpelah should mean, right? Now let us go a little bit weiter. We will come to Sheni. Sheni begins Vayokam stay Ephraim Asher b'Machpelah. The field of Ephraim, which is in the Machpelah, Vayokam stood up. Asher lifnei Mamre. And the pasuk continues, Hasada, the field, V'ma'ora Asher b'y, in the cave that's in it, V'chol ha'etz, and all the trees Asher b'sada that are in the field, Asher b'chol gvulei saviv. Let us look into Rashi. Vayokam stay Ephraim. What does Rashi comment? Tkuma hoysala. It had a tkuma. It rose. It got reaffirmed. Sheyatza miyad hedyet liad melech. The field itself rose. What's the pshat? Prior to that, it was owned by Ephraim. Now it left Ephraim and went into the hands of a melech, who is Avram. So the field itself was kind of uplifted. Upshuta shel mikra. What is the pashat pshat? Vayokom hasode v'ha'ma'ora asher boi v'chol ha'etz la'Avram lamikna. That everything that's involved, which the pasuk is talking about, was owned by Avram. The field and the cave and all the trees, everything was owned by Avram. So first of all, there's a very obvious question here. Obvious question is, Rashi's inyan is always to explain Pshuta Shel Mikra. Here Rashi does a little bit different. He tells us a pshat which is not exactly Pshuta Shel Mikra first. Then he tells us, Pshuta Shel Mikra is so and so. This is very unusual in Rashi. Rashi's prime concern, as we always stress, is to say Pshuta Shel Mikra first. Okay, that's one question. Then the Rebbe is asking, actually what Rashi is explaining is not only the Vayokam Sdei Ephraim. What Rashi is explaining is the entire thing, that everything was uplifted. So that's not only the Sada, that's the Sada, and as Rashi himself says, the Sada and the Ma'ayra, the cave that's in it. So Rashi should have at least said, Vayokam Sdei Ephraim, V'goyma. He's not only explaining these three words, he's explaining V'goyma has a shaychus to the entire pasuk, which Rashi doesn't. He came to explain the Rashi, the Rebbe looked on the clock and he says, he's in a rush to Mincha. So he says he will explain it briefly. In other words, so not all the questions were really answered. But what the Rebbe is learning here in the pasuk, after asking another question, Vayokam stay Ephraim, the field of Ephraim, Asher b'Machpelah, which is in the Machpelah. There's no field in the Machpelah. Where's there a field in the Machpelah? We just learned a few psukim ago, what does Machpelah mean? Machpelah means literally the area where all of those who were buried there, that's called Machpelah. So what's the pshat? The field that is in the Machpelah? There is a Machpelah. The Machpelah is in a field. But there's no field in the Machpelah. So we have to understand the pasuk, especially Rashi already told us what Machpelah means. So that is why the Rebbe is learning completely different. The Rebbe learns, Vayokom Sdei Ephraim, the field of Ephraim, Asher Machpelah, which was in an area which is called Machpelah. Because of the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. What's the Pshat Ma'aras HaMachpelah? Taka, like Rashi himself just told us, it was called Machpelah for two reasons. Because either it was a house and had another floor on top, or because those who were buried there were buried in couples. But besides that, the entire area was called Machpelah. In fact, Pasuk says, where's there a Pasuk? Biktsei HaSodeh, that this was at the end of the field. Yaviyitali is Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the cave, the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, Asher lo it's Pasuk Tes. Biktsei Sodeyu, that's what Avram asked him for. But what Avram really wound up buying was not only the area where the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, it was a complete piece of land. And this piece of land, the Rebbe learns, is called Machpelah. Rebbe says it's interesting that when all the Rebbes learn Chumash for all generations with children, they never raise such type of a question. But this is how he's learning. Vayokom Sdei Ephraim Asher Machpelah, the field of Ephraim, which is in the area that's called Machpelah. Asher, then the pasuk goes ahead and gives another siman, which is Lifnei Mamre. Hasodeh, what did you have? What did Machpelah consist of? Machpelah consisted of a field. It also consisted of a cave. What is the cave? The Ma'aras HaMachpelah. That was also there. V'chalaitz asher b'sodeh, asher b'chol gvulisav. He says it's interesting that if we check out this pasuk, we will find the Rashbam, who's the grandson of Rashi. Taka learns Pshat in the pasuk this way. He learns Pshat that Machpelah is an area. The entire area was named Machpelah. In other words, in addition to the Me'aras HaMachpelah, there was another, the entire area, because of the Me'aras HaMachpelah, was named that way. And that is when the pasuk here is talking about Vayokom Sdei Ephraim, the field of Ephraim, had an uprising. So it means not only, it means the entire field. The Sodeh, the field, and the cave, and everything which is in it. That's why Rashi stresses all of this. Vayokom HaSodeh v'Amora Shaboi v'Cholaitz. Everything was L'Avram L'Mikna. Regarding today's Shia Rambam, again, being it was very late, so the Rebbe just mentioned it briefly. The Rambam in Perik Yud Beis of Hilchos Oves HaTumah discusses Achas Esrei Mailos, 11 Mailos. Mailos here would be 11 takonis, 11 different types of rulings the Chachamim made L'Kodesh ala Truma. B'chlal these prokim in the Rambam are talking about the dinim of Tumah v'Tara. Here the Rambam tells us that there were 11 different inyonim which we had to be careful in when we were dealing with Kodesh, 11 more chumras when we were dealing with Kodesh as when we are dealing with Truma. Truma, we know we also have to be very careful when we deal with Truma to make sure that it is dealt on the highest level of Tahara. However, when we deal with Kodesh, when we deal with Inyanim that have a shaykhs to Korbanos, we have to be even more careful. And the Rambam tells us all of the 11 different things. So the Rebbe says, first of all, the Rambam usually does not get involved in just giving numbers to tell us whether it is 11 or a different number. So the reason the Rambam here does give it, because in the Gemara there is a machlokes whether 10 or 11. Gemara there is a machlokes whether there are 10 milos, 10 additional chumras by kochim, or 11. So the Rambam tells us that there are 11. So the Rambam right away, by telling us this, right away tells us that the Rambam goes with the opinion in the Gemara that there are 11 chumras by kochim as opposed to truma. If we look into the details of the Perek, the Rebbe continues, we will find that these 11 are broken up into two categories, 5 and 6. Because there's a concept of chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. In other words, there were many people, Bizman Abayis, that were extremely careful that even their chulin, in other words, their regular food which they ate it with the same type of chumrah as they would eat kodesh. And this is referred to in Gemara, chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. Chulin it is choil, it's a regular food, but it has been done with the same kedusha that's, in other words, they were careful, extremely cautious around it, that they should not come into contact with any tumah whatsoever. The Rebbe just got involved in the spiritual, in the heroia of this. What did the Rebbe teach here? That there's an inyan of 10 and there's an inyan of 11. Normally, we know in Kedusha we always refer to number 10. And 10 is the highest number in Kedusha. 10 Sviras, 10 Koyches HaNefesh. Always we deal with the number of 10. However, sometimes the Rebbe says 10 is not enough. We have to come on to the number of 11. Ktoiras had 11 Samamonim. We say every day in davening. The highest Avodah, most chashuv Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash was the Avodah of the Ktoiras. We see a remarkable halacha by Ktoiras. By Ktoiras we see im chisar echod mikol samamoneho. If he missed out with one of the spices, was not there, chayev, then shalom, the punishment is, as the Rebbe expressed himself, the opposite of Torah's chayim. The contrary of Torah's the Torah of life. So here we see how important we have to be, how careful we have to be by all the dinim of Torahs, and how meaningful it is. So we see that Torahs was a tremendous important avodah. So what is this whole inyan of Yud Aleph? In other words, there are times when avodas Hashem is enough with the mispar of Yud. However, comes a time where dedicating oneself with Esek Koyches HaNefesh is not enough. There's a requirement for Achas Esre Mailas, 11 Mailas. And this is what the Rambam is talking about here, 11 Mailas Osu Chachamim L'Kodesh. This is the same idea. We have Yud Aleph Samamonim, we have 11 Samamonim which compose the Ktoiras. Towards the end of the Farbrengen, Rabbi says, being that earlier we spoke about Simcha and about the importance of Simcha, Rabbi says there are certain affairs which are going to be taking place within the next few days, and he's going to give mashke for these affairs, and this is also an inyan of Simcha. And giving the mashke is a participation, which all of this arouses Simcha. Therefore the Rebbe gave mashke for a few occasions which will be taking place the next few days. The Rebbe also says that should be announced. Everyone should announce those recipients of the mashke for what occasion they are getting it, and when it'll take place, various Malava Malka or dinner or whatever it is, and all of this should be done Mitoich Simcha. The Rebbe gave everyone mashke. It's customary in every Farbrengen. The Rebbe always stresses it. It's interesting that whenever the Rebbe gives mashke for an occasion which will take place during the week, a weekday occasion, the Rebbe is always careful in mentioning that the one who's getting the bottle of mashke from him should give out at least a little bit at the Farbrengen as well. Otherwise, it's considered that he's doing something, he's preparing on Shabbos for during the week, which we're not allowed to do. However, if he's giving out at least a part of the mashke at the Farbrengen, so he's already doing something on Shabbos. And this is the proper way to do it. At the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe began a Nigen Shel Simcha, the famous Hakafes Nigen. And this is how the Farbrengen ended. A gute Woche.